Hey, I'm Mark. Come on in. Yes, this is my home. Doesn't matter. You can learn anywhere. Today, let's look at one of Hollywood's greatest movie directors, Irwin Allen, and his greatest movie, The Poseidon Adventure. Let's find out why he would invest $5 million to make this movie. What kind of return on investment was he expecting? Let's look at the Zeitgeist of the 1970s, find out why this movie was so popular. So popular that it spawned an entire decade of disaster movies. Let's be entertained while we're quarantined. Let's go rogue. Shh. Don't tell my principal. I'm supposed to be teaching a class right now. On December 13, 1972, 20th Century Fox released The Poseidon Adventure, the first in a series of disaster movies produced by Irwin Allen. The film was based on a novel by Paul Gallico, a renowned novelist and sports writer. It was based on a trip of his across the Atlantic on the Queen Mary. While having lunch in the dining room of the Queen Mary, the ship was struck by 3 powerful waves. The third one caused the boat to list. People were knocked out of their chairs, trays fell from the waiters' hands, lunches slid off at tables. The ship righted itself, but Gallico thought, what if it didn't? What followed was the Poseidon Adventure. The driving force behind Poseidon Adventure, the movie, was Irwin Allen. He had pitched the film to Avco Embassy, but nothing was done. The story was then green-lighted by 20th Century Fox, but a change in management pulled the film just as Allen was ready to start production. Citing the production cost of $5 million, the new management at 20th Century Fox said that if Allen could get half of the money on his own, the studio would kick in the other half. As Irwin Allen explains it, he had a couple of wealthy friends that were members of a country club down the street from the studios. They wrote him a check, and the movie was on. Cool story, bro. Let's get to the action. The ship's captain is played by Leslie Nielsen. He is serious, and don't call him Shirley. He spends the first 30 minutes of the movie in repeated tiffs with a representative of the ship's owner, who demands that the aging Poseidon go full steam to Athens, preventing her from taking on ballast, which makes her unstable in the ocean. Gene Hackman, who won the Academy Award for Best Actor the previous year in The French Connection, plays Reverend Frank Scott, a minister gone rogue. He believes that God helps those who help themselves. He's on the ship because he's being sent to Africa as punishment for his unorthodox views. Ernest Borgnine plays Detective Lieutenant Mike Rogo, who is traveling with his wife, who's a former prostitute. Susan and her younger brother Robin are traveling to meet their parents in Greece. Robin's interested in how the ship operates, and he frequently visits the engine room. Retired Jewish store owner Manny Rosen. You can't fool me. That's Grandpa Joe. Oh, he's traveling to Israel with his wife Belle to meet their young grandson whom they've never met before. James Martin is a 50-something, love-shy, health-conscious, a bachelor. And Nani Perry, she's a singer for the ship's band. I'm with the band, man. On New Year's Eve, the passengers on the ship gather in the ship's ballroom to celebrate. Reverend Scott is sitting at the same table as the Rogos. Captain Harrison is called to the bridge in response to a report of an undersea earthquake. He then receives word from a lookout that a 90-foot-high rogue wave is headed right towards the ship. He issues a Mayday distress signal. The ship is hit broadside by the wave. Frank Drebin dies when the wave smashes into the bridge. Now you can call him Shirley. What follows is the best piece of cinematic eye candy probably ever. You can CGI stuff all you want, but practical effects are so much better. As the ship capsizes, the ballroom inside turns over. People begin sliding towards the wall, stage right, then falling. Heavy objects begin crashing into people. Tables, chairs, a piano. Eventually the ship settles, upside down. There are many hanging from tables from the floor, which has now become the ceiling. Many of them fall, we presume, to their deaths. The most spectacular fall is by Larry, falling from a table onto a large light below. The light in the room surges, and the power goes out in the entire ship. One minute you're dancing with Nancy Drew, and the next minute you're falling 40 feet into the ceiling lights. Soon afterward, the survivors take stock of their predicament. Akers, an injured waiter, emerges from the galley, which is now far above the ballroom. Seeing Akers, Reverend Scott surmises that the way out of the situation is to go up through the hull, which is now above water. He tells the survivor that they must climb upwards to safety. If they stay there, they will be doomed. The ship's purser tells the crowd not to follow Scott, to stay where they're at, and that they would be saved. Most of the survivors side with the purser. The Rogos, the Rosens, Susan, Robin, Noni, and Martin go with Scott, climbing a Christmas tree to reach the galley. Suddenly there's an explosion, and the wall outside is breached, and water comes flooding into the ballroom. The Poseidon begins to sink. Reverend Scott leads the group through the ship's hull towards the engine room. While climbing a ladder inside a ventilation shaft, there's an explosion that rocks the ship, and Akers falls. He dies in spite of Rogo's attempt to save him. Once out of the shaft, they meet another group that's headed towards the bow. Scott tries to convince them that they're going the wrong way. The way to safety is through the stern, and that they're going the wrong direction. Rogo argues with Scott, saying that they should follow them, but Scott insists that they must continue to the engine room. Access to the engine room is blocked by a flooded corridor. Bella Rosen explains that she's a former competitive swimmer and volunteers to go through, but Scott dives in first. Halfway through the corridor, a panel collapses on Scott and he's trapped. Rogo notices the delay. Bell dives in, finds his way to Reverend Scott and frees him. They make it to the other side, but Belle suffers a heart attack. Before dying, she tells Scott to give a pendant that she wears to Manny to give to her grandchildren. The rest of the group swims over. When Manny Rosen finds Belle's body, he refuses to go on. But Scott gives him her pendant and reminds him that he has so much more of a reason to live. Scott leads the survivors to a propeller shaft room's watertight door. But another series of explosions causes Linda to lose her grip and she falls to her death. Rogo blames her death on Reverend Scott, and he cries out, "You killed her! You killed her! You killed my Linda!" The group finds their escape, blocked by steam emitting from a ruptured pipe. Scott rants at God for the survivors' deaths, then jumps on the valve wheel, hanging from it, using his weight to close the pipe. He hangs above a pool of flaming oil. He continues shouting at God until he finally turns the valve off. He then looks at Rogo and tells him to lead them the rest of the way through. Lets go of the valve and falls to his death. Rogo leads the remaining survivors, Rosen, Martin, Nani, Susan, and Robin, through the watertight doors into the propeller shaft room. Hearing noise from the outside, they bang on the hull to attract attention. Rescuers cut through the hull, saving the 6 survivors from the ship and inform them that no one else survived. Roll credits. History, man. That's what we do here. What made Irwin Allen think that he could invest $5 million into this movie and turn a profit? Why would millions of people cram into movie theaters and watch a show about survivors of a ship capsizing? Why this in 1972? We think of the 1970s, we think of Nixon, Watergate, the gas crisis. But the origination of the film was back in the late 1960s. It's a reaction to the hippie go free counterculture movement of the late 60s. Consider the 2 main characters in the movie. One's a police officer, one's a pastor. 2 professions that represent authority. During the 1960s, the counterculture had rejected that authority, and by 1967, we headed into a long, hot summer, with riots occurring in Atlanta, and Detroit, and Newark, and Watts, and the Democratic Party convention in Chicago in 1968. The image of young people destroying private property and assaulting police officers became associated with the Democratic Party. What people wanted was a return to authority, a return to respect for authority, law and order, traditional values. Those things represented by the Republican candidate for president in 1968, Richard Nixon. Ideals represented by the police officer Mike Rogo and the pastor Frank Scott. When society gets turned upside down, like it was on the SS Poseidon, we seek those traditional leaders of the past. Check this out. Reverend Scott is actually a Messiah figure. He's a renegade pastor. He eats dinner with sinners. The prostitute, Linda Rogo. After the ship overturns, Scott pleads with the people inside the ballroom that the way to salvation is up. We must go up. We must climb upward. Stay here and you will surely die. He carries a Christmas tree, like Jesus carrying the cross, to find a way to safety. Salvation is by way of the tree. Even within his group, there are those that are put off by his unusual confidence. Mike Rogo at one point stares at him and says, "Who do you think you are, God himself?" In the final climactic scene, Reverend Scott sacrifices himself. After a long and agonizing prayer, he jumps up onto the steam valve, turns it, and then hangs for a few seconds before releasing himself and falling into the flaming oil. The rest of the group finds its way to salvation through the sacrifice of Reverend Scott. By the end of 1973, the Poseidon Adventure made $100 million. It was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, winning 2 of them for Best Visual Effects and for Best Original Song. There's got to be a morning after. It spawned a sequel, which was bad, and 2 remakes, which were also bad. In the immediate, it started a wave of disaster films and went all through the 1970s. It made Irwin Allen the master of disaster. Hey, thanks for coming by. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you were entertained while you were quarantined. If I did it right, you did all 3. If you like history, if you're fascinated by what makes people tick, if you're interested in the Zeitgeist of an era, like the 1970s, then I would appreciate it. I would love it. I would be honored if you would subscribe to my channel. I had fun, but I won't quit my day job. And next time you're on a cruise ship and you get hit by a rogue wave and the ship starts to turn over, remember me. I'm Mark Haggard. I'm a history teacher. And I've gone rogue.